The courtiers were laughing, that particularly crystalline sound of nobility mocking what they didn't understand. When Princess Alara's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade through silk. "That woman you're ridiculing is my sister." The laughter died instantly. Every eye in the glittering hall turned to stare, first at the princess in her cloth of gold gown, then at Mira, the dark-skinned physician's apprentice who'd been serving wine and enduring whispers about foreign filth and sunburnt mongrel for the past hour. Mira's hands trembled so violently that the wine decanter nearly slipped from her fingers. She'd never spoken to Princess Alara, had never been within 10 feet of royalty, had no idea why the kingdom's most beloved daughter was staring at her with tears streaming down her porcelain face, or why the princess was now crossing the ballroom floor, nobles parting like water before a ship's prow, walking directly toward her with arms outstretched like she'd found something precious she'd thought lost forever. "Sister," Alara said again, and this time it wasn't a declaration, it was a sob. And Mira understood, in that terrible crystalline moment, that her life had just shattered into something unrecognizable. Wait, before the next confession unfolds, if this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. 24 hours earlier, Mira had been nobody. Less than nobody. She'd been invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it. As apprentice to Dr. Cornelius Verne, the court physician, she existed in the shadows of the palace's east wing, grinding herbs and mixing tinctures and trying desperately not to be noticed by anyone important. Being noticed meant questions. Questions meant explanations. And explanations about why her skin was the color of burnished mahogany while everyone else at court was milk pale inevitably led to discomfort, suspicion, and a kind of casual cruelty that people with power inflicted without even realizing they were wielding weapons. Mira had learned early to make herself small, to speak only when spoken to keep her eyes down and her exceptional mind hidden behind a mask of servile competence. At 22, she was the most skilled apprentice Dr. Verne had ever trained. She could diagnose fevers by scent, compound medicines that worked twice as well as traditional remedies, and had pioneered a technique for stitching wounds that left minimal scarring. But none of that mattered in the kingdom of Astoria, where your value was determined by bloodline and complexion before it was determined by anything as inconvenient as talent. "Mira!" Dr. Verne's voice echoed down the stone corridor. "The princess requires attendance, now!" Mira's heart seized. She'd been carefully avoiding any situation that might put her in proximity to the royal family. The king was said to be fair-minded, but his courtiers were vipers, and his youngest daughter, Princess Alara, 18 and achingly beautiful, was surrounded by ladies-in-waiting who treated anyone below their station like interesting insects to be studied and mocked. "Surely someone more appropriate," Mira began. "The princess specifically asked for my most skilled apprentice. That's you. Unless you'd like to explain to Her Highness why you're refusing to treat her." Dr. Verne's expression was sympathetic but firm. He was one of the few people at court who'd never treated Mira's skin color as a curiosity or an insult. He simply didn't care. All that mattered to him was competence, and Mira was supremely competent. She followed him through the palace corridors, her medical bag clutched to her chest like armor. The royal apartments were in the western tower, accessible only through galleries lined with portraits of pale-skinned ancestors staring down with expressions of hereditary disapproval. Mira kept her eyes fixed on Dr. Verne's back, refusing to meet those painted gazes. Princess Alara's chambers were chaos. Ladies-in-waiting fluttered around like anxious birds, and the princess herself lay on a velvet couch, one hand pressed to her temple, her legendary golden hair spread across the cushions like spilled honey. "Your Highness," Dr. Verne bowed deeply, "my apprentice and I are here to attend you." Elara's eyes opened, startling violet, the color of twilight, and fixed immediately on Mira. The princess stared, just stared, long enough that the ladies-in-waiting began to whisper, and Mira felt heat crawl up her neck despite her best efforts to remain composed. "You," Elara breathed. "You're my apprentice, Mira," Dr. Verne supplied quickly. "The finest diagnostic mind I've trained. She'll examine your Highness with my supervision." But Elara wasn't listening. She'd sat up, ignoring the ladies trying to restrain her, and was staring at Mira with an expression that looked uncomfortably like recognition. "Your face, your eyes, have we met before?" "No, Your Highness," Mira said carefully, executing a perfect curtsy. "I would certainly remember such an honor." "But you look," Elara kyled off, confusion and something else, something almost like hope, flickering across her delicate features. Then she seemed to collect herself, remembering propriety. "Forgive me, I've been having terrible headaches. They make me see things that aren't there." "That's why we're here," Dr. Verne said smoothly. "Mira, if you would, examine Her Highness. Check for fever, examine her eyes and reflexes." Mira approached the princess with professional detachment, even as her heart hammered. This close, Elara was almost painfully beautiful. Porcelain skin dusted with gold freckles, lips the color of rose petals, that extraordinary violet gaze that seemed to pierce straight through pretense. Mira touched the princess's forehead, no fever, checked her pulse, elevated but not dangerously so, examined her eyes with a small brass instrument, looking for signs of pressure or damage. And that's when she saw it, the tiny crescent-shaped birthmark at the corner of Elara's left eye, normally invisible beneath carefully applied cosmetics. A mark Mira knew intimately because she bore the exact same birthmark in the exact same place. Her hands stilled. "What is it?" Elara asked. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, Your Highness," Mira lied, her voice steady through sheer force of will. "A moment, please." She stepped back, mind racing. It was coincidence. Had to be. People had similar birthmarks all the time. The fact that Elara's was identical to hers meant nothing, nothing at all. Except Elara was still staring at her with that strange, desperate recognition. And Mira remembered, suddenly, a story Dr. Verne had told her years ago, a piece of palace gossip had dismissed as nonsense, but that had lodged in her memory like a splinter. 18 years ago, Queen Margot had given birth to twins, but one child had been born sickly, not expected to survive. The royal physicians had worked through the night, and by morning they'd announced one healthy princess, Elara, and one dead infant, buried quickly and quietly to spare the queen additional grief. But there had been rumors, whispers that the dead child wasn't dead at all, that she'd been born with skin too dark, features too foreign, evidence of something that couldn't be explained except by infidelity or curse, that she'd been spirited away to avoid scandal, given to someone far from court, and the story of her death fabricated to protect the crown. Mira had dismissed it as the kind of ugly gossip that festered in noble circles. But now, looking at Elara's birthmark, identical to her own, she felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "The headaches," Mira heard herself say. "How long have you had them?" 3 weeks, since my 18th birthday. Elara touched her temple gingerly. "They come in waves, and I keep having these dreams of a woman with dark skin holding me, singing to me. I thought I was going mad." "You're not mad," Dr. Verne said gently. "Sometimes stress manifests in unusual ways. The pressure of upcoming marriage negotiations, perhaps?" But Mira was barely hearing him, because she'd been having dreams too, of a woman with golden hair, of violet eyes looking at her with love. Dreams she'd had since childhood, dreams she'd convinced herself were fantasy, because the woman in them looked nothing like the dark-skinned healer who'd raised her in the southern provinces. The healer who died 2 months ago, leaving Mira alone, except for a final cryptic message. "You are more than you know. When the time comes, remember, blood calls to blood, and truth cannot hide forever." "Your Highness," Mira said carefully, "may I ask, do you know anything about your birth? About whether there were any complications?" The ladies in waiting gasped. One didn't question royalty about such intimate matters. But Alara's expression shifted, sharpening with something like hunger. "I know my mother nearly died bringing me into the world," she said slowly. "I know the birth was difficult. Why do you ask?" Mira couldn't answer, couldn't voice the impossible thought taking shape in her mind. Because if she was wrong, she'd be executed for suggesting the princess had a secret twin. And if she was right, everything she knew about herself was a lie. "Forgive me, Your Highness. The fever has made me speak out of turn." Mira bowed deeply. "For the headaches, I recommend willow bark tea twice daily, rest in a darkened room, and avoidance of loud sounds. Dr. Verne can prepare the necessary tinctures." She fled before anyone could stop her, medical bag clutched to her chest, mind spinning with impossible possibilities. Behind her, she heard Ilara call out, "Wait, please, But the ladies in waiting were already closing ranks, murmuring soothing platitudes, and Mira escaped into the corridor with her heart trying to batter its way out of her ribs. She made it to the physician's workroom before her legs gave out, sank onto a stool, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. It couldn't be true. It was impossible. She was the daughter of a healer from the southern provinces, adopted after her parents died in a plague. That was the story she'd been told her entire life, the story she'd built her identity around. But she'd never seen her adoption papers, had never met anyone who claimed to have known her birth parents. The healer who'd raised her, Grandmother Kessa, had always deflected questions with, "Some truths are dangerous. Be grateful for the love you have, child, and don't go digging for the love you've lost." And that birthmark, that impossible identical birthmark. Mira? Dr. Verne had followed her. He closed the workroom door, then sat heavily on the bench across from her. "I saw your face when you examined the princess. What did you find?" "Nothing. A migraine, like we suspected. You're an excellent physician, but a terrible liar." He studied her with the same careful attention he gave to difficult diagnoses. "The birthmark. You saw it?" Mira's head snapped up. "You knew?" "I suspected. When you first came to me 5 years ago, I noticed the mark, and I'd been present at Princess Ilara's birth. I was a junior physician then, but I remember seeing an identical mark on both infants before—" He stopped. Before what? Mira's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Verne was quiet for a long moment. "Before one of the infants was declared dead and removed from the birthing chamber. I was young, inexperienced. I accepted the senior physician's word that the child had expired, but I always wondered. The infant had been crying, healthy lungs, and then suddenly she was gone, and we were told not to speak of it." "Which infant?" Mira asked, though she already knew. "The one with darker skin, the one who looked like she'd inherited traits from somewhere further back in the royal bloodline. Or," he hesitated, "there were rumors about the queen, about a liaison with a diplomat from the southern kingdoms before her marriage. Nothing confirmed, but enough to make a dark-skinned child problematic." Mira felt like she was drowning in air. So they killed her? Or tried to? I don't know. But I do know that 2 months later, a healer from the southern provinces arrived at court asking for an apprenticeship position for her granddaughter. A granddaughter she claimed to have recently adopted after the child's parents died. The timing. He met her eyes. I've spent 5 years watching you, Mira, watching how you move, how you think. You have the Queen's intelligence, the King's strategic mind, and Princess Alara's gift for reading people. That doesn't make me royal, Mira said desperately. Coincidence isn't proof. No, but that birthmark is rather damning evidence. He leaned forward. The question is, what do we do about it? If you are Princess Alara's twin, you're legitimate heir to the throne. But revealing that truth would destabilize the entire kingdom. It would suggest the Queen was unfaithful, or that the King's bloodline carries unexpected traits. Either option is political poison. So we do nothing, Mira said. We pretend I never saw the birthmark. I avoid the princess. Life continues as it was. Can you do that? Can you pretend now that you know? Mira thought about Alara's desperate expression, about those dreams they apparently shared. About 18 years of being alone, being other, being judged for skin that marked her as foreign in the only kingdom she'd ever known. I don't know, she admitted. Before Dr. Vern could respond, the workroom door slammed open. A royal guard stood there, breathing hard. The princess demands Mira's presence at tonight's spring equinox ball. She's to attend as the physician's representative, non-negotiable. Mira's stomach dropped. I'm not trained for court functions. I wouldn't know how to... The princess was very clear. You will attend. In proper dress, with proper etiquette. The royal seamstresses are preparing a gown now. The guard's expression was carefully neutral, but Mira saw the disdain lurking beneath. A dark-skinned apprentice at the most important social event of the season? She'd be a spectacle, a curiosity, fresh meat for the courtiers who treated anyone different as entertainment. This is cruel, Dr. Vern said quietly after the guard left. She's putting you directly in the path of ridicule. Or she's testing something, Mira said. She recognized me. Maybe not consciously, but she felt it, that connection. And now she wants to see me in context. See if I really could be. She couldn't finish the sentence. That evening, Mira stood in a borrowed gown of deep crimson silk, staring at her reflection and barely recognizing herself. The royal seamstresses had worked magic, creating a dress that honored her darker skin rather than trying to hide it. But no amount of beautiful fabric could change the fact that she was about to walk into a room full of nobility who'd rather see her serving wine than wearing silk. You look like a princess, Dr. Vern said from the doorway. His voice was odd, thick with emotion. I look like a target, Mira corrected. But she lifted her chin and walked toward her fate. The ballroom was a confection of gold and crystal, lit by 1,000 candles and filled with Astoria's finest nobility. Music swirled through the air like perfume, and every single person stopped talking when Mira entered. The silence was suffocating. Then the whispers started, a susurrus of shock and disdain that followed her like a shadow as she made her way through the crowd. She heard fragments, dark as a stable hand. What was the princess thinking? Probably cursed, foreign filth wearing silk. Mira kept walking, kept her expression serene, even as humiliation burned through her veins like poison. She found a position near the wine service, as far from the center of attention as possible, and tried to become invisible again. That's when the mockery began in earnest. A duchess with a face like a pinched ferret stage whispered to her companions, I hear they had to bathe her 3 times to get her that color. Laughter, bright and cruel. A lord raised his glass toward Mira in a mock toast. 2 exotic curiosities. May they know their place. More laughter, harder now, the kind that had teeth. Mira's hands trembled as she poured wine, her earlier courage evaporating under the weight of their contempt. She'd been a fool to think she could stand here among them. She didn't belong, would never belong. I wonder if she's actually human or some kind of... That woman you're ridiculing is my sister. Princess Ilara's voice cut through the ballroom like the crack of a whip. The laughter died so quickly it left a vacuum of silence in its wake. Mira looked up, shock stealing her breath. Ilara stood on the raised dais where the royal family held court, still as a statue, her face pale with fury and streaming with tears. The king beside her had half risen from his throne, confusion etched across his features. The queen looked stricken, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Your Highness," the Duchess stammered, "surely you jest." "Do I look like I'm jesting?" Ilara descended from the dais, and the crowd parted before her. She crossed the ballroom floor with purpose, her golden gown trailing behind her like liquid sunlight. She never took her eyes off Mira. "Sister," Ilara said again, her voice breaking. "I don't know how. I don't understand it, but I know it's true. I've known since the moment I saw you this morning. You have my birthmark, my dreams, my face, beneath the difference in our skin. And she was openly crying now, careless of the hundreds of witnesses. I felt incomplete my entire life, like part of me was missing, like I was supposed to be 2 instead of 1. And now, here you are, and I understand why." She stopped directly in front of Mira, close enough that Mira could see her own shocked reflection in those violet eyes. "You're my twin," Ilara whispered. "Aren't you? The sister they told me died at birth? The one they spirited away because she didn't look like them? Because they were ashamed." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Nobles shouting, guards moving forward, the king bellowing for order. But Mira heard none of it. She was staring at Ilara, at this girl who was simultaneously stranger and mirror, and feeling something inside her chest crack open. "I don't know," Mira said hoarsely. "I was raised by a healer in the southern provinces. She told me my parents died when I was an infant. I never knew. I never thought." "Show me," Ilara demanded. "The birthmark. Show me." With trembling fingers, Mira touched the corner of her left eye, where the tiny crescent-shaped mark lay hidden. Ilara reached up, mirrored the gesture on her own face. Then she grabbed Mira's hand and pressed it to her mark, pressed her own hand to Mira's. Identical, perfect mirrors. "Blood calls to blood," Ilara breathed, echoing the phrase Grandmother Kessa had used in her final moments. "Enough!" The king's voice thundered through the ballroom. "Ilara, you will return to your place. This person, this servant, will be removed from the palace immediately." No. Ilara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. She turned to face her father, still holding Mira's hand. "If she goes, I go. If you exile her, you exile me. Because I don't care what laws or customs say. I know she's my sister. I feel it in my bones. And I will not lose her again." The queen had descended from the dais now, moving with a grace that spoke of long practice hiding turmoil. She studied Mira with an expression Mira couldn't read. Fear, recognition, regret, all tangled together. "Margot," the king said, his voice lower now, dangerous. "Tell me this is nonsense. Tell me this girl is not." "I can't," the queen whispered, and then louder, "I can't lie anymore, Sebastian, not about this." The ballroom went absolutely silent. Queen Margot approached Mira slowly, like approaching a wild creature that might bolt. When she spoke, her voice was raw with suppressed grief. 18 years ago, I gave birth to twins. Both girls, both healthy, both beautiful. She touched Mira's face with shaking fingers. But one had skin that spoke of my great-grandmother's heritage, a southern queen whose blood flows through our line, though we've hidden it for generations. And the royal physicians said, a dark-skinned heir would destabilize the kingdom, would raise questions about legitimacy we couldn't afford to answer. So they told me one child had died. They took her away. And her voice broke, I let them, because I was weak, because I was afraid, because I chose political stability over my own daughter. She was crying now, tears cutting tracks through her carefully applied cosmetics. I mourned you. Every day for 18 years, I mourned the child I wasn't brave enough to save. And then you appeared at court, and I knew it was you. But I was still too cowardly to admit the truth, still too afraid of what it would cost. Mira felt like she'd been gutted. All those years of wondering why she was different, why she didn't belong anywhere, and it was because she'd been royal-born and deliberately erased, deemed too problematic to acknowledge, too dangerous to the kingdom's carefully curated image. You let them steal me, she said, her voice shaking with rage she'd never allowed herself to feel. You let them tell me I was nobody, that I didn't matter. Do you know what it's like to grow up knowing you're other, knowing you'll never be quite enough because of something you can't control? Do you have any idea? No, the queen said simply. I don't, and I will spend the rest of my life being ashamed of that. But Ilara, she turned to her acknowledged daughter, Ilara is braver than I ever was. She claimed you before the entire court, knowing what it would cost her, knowing the scandal, the questions, the political chaos. She chose you over comfort, over safety, over everything our station demands. Ilara stepped closer to Mira, their hands still joined. I've spent 18 years being perfect, being the ideal princess, never making waves, never questioning the order of things. And I was miserable, hollow, like I was performing life instead of living it. She squeezed Mira's hand. But the moment I saw you, something in me woke up, and I realized I don't want to be the perfect princess anymore. I want to be your sister, even if it means losing everything else. You can't mean that, the king said, but his voice had lost its thunder. Ilara, you're the heir, the kingdom's future. You can't throw that away for my sister? Ilara's voice was fierce. Watch me. Either Mira is acknowledged as Princess of Astoria with all rights and titles that accompany that recognition, or I abdicate, tonight, publicly, in front of all these witnesses. The threat landed like a physical blow. The king staggered, the queen gasped, and the assembled courtiers erupted in panicked whispers. You would destabilize the entire succession? The king said. Throw the kingdom into chaos? You already threw it into chaos, Ilara shot back. 18 years ago, when you decided one daughter was acceptable and the other was expendable. I'm just forcing you to face the consequences of that choice. Mira found her voice. Stop! Both of you! Stop! She pulled her hand from Ilara's, stepped back. I don't want to be a princess. I don't want titles or succession rights or any of this. I just want... She stopped. Because what did she want? She'd spent so long trying to survive that she'd never let herself want anything bigger than safety. You want to be seen, Ilara said softly. You want to matter. You want people to look at you and see your skill, your intelligence, your heart, not your skin. Am I wrong? Mira's throat tightened. No, you're not wrong. Then let me give you that. Let me stand beside you and force this entire kingdom to see what I see, someone brilliant and brave and worthy of respect, someone who saved my life this morning by not revealing the truth before I was ready to hear it, someone who survived 18 years of being dismissed and degraded and still chose to be kind rather than bitter. Ilara's voice dropped. Please, let me be the sister to you that I needed you to be to me. It was the please that broke her. That one word, offered with such naked vulnerability by a girl who was supposed to be above begging. A girl who just risked everything, crown, reputation, future, to claim kinship with someone the kingdom considered beneath notice. Okay, Mira whispered. Okay. Ilara's smile was incandescent. She grabbed Mira's hands again, turned to face the assembled court. Then let it be known, this is Princess Mira, my twin sister, stolen at birth and hidden to preserve a lie. I claim her as blood, as family, as heir, and anyone who questions her worth answers to me. The king closed his eyes, looking every one of his 53 years. Then he sighed. You leave me no choice, daughter. Both my daughters, apparently. He descended from the dais, approached Mira with slow, measured steps. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. If this is true, and the birthmark, the timing, the recognition, it appears to be true, then a great injustice was done. To you, Mira, and to the kingdom which was deprived of your presence. He knelt, actually knelt, the king of Astoria kneeling before a girl in a borrowed dress who still smelled faintly of medicine and herbs. I cannot undo the past. I cannot restore the 18 years you lost, but I can acknowledge the truth now. You are my daughter, Princess Mira of Astoria, and I formally apologize for the cowardice that led to your exile. The ballroom erupted in chaos again, but different this time. Not mockery, but shock, confusion, frantic recalculation of political positions. Mira stood frozen, staring down at the king's bowed head, unable to process the sudden reversal of her entire existence. Father, Ilara said, her voice trembling. Thank you. The king rose, turned to address the court. There will be an official investigation, documentation, verification of bloodline through our royal physicians. But as of this moment, Mira is under crown protection. Any insult to her is an insult to the crown itself. Any harm attempted against her will be treated as treason. Am I understood? A chorus of hasty agreement rippled through the crowd. The same people who'd been mocking her minutes ago now bowed, offering stammered apologies and false smiles. It was grotesque. It was exactly what Mira had always suspected about nobility, that they had no genuine convictions, only convenient positions. I need air, Mira said suddenly. I need... Come. Ilara grabbed her hand, pulled her toward the balcony doors. They escaped into the cool night air, leaving the chaos behind, and for a moment just stood, breathing, staring out at the palace gardens silver-lit by moonlight. I'm sorry, Ilara said, for all of it, for what you endured, for not finding you sooner, for... Stop apologizing for things that weren't your fault, Mira interrupted. You were an infant. You didn't choose to be kept while I was discarded, and tonight you gave me something I've never had. Not just acknowledgement, but someone willing to burn their own life down rather than let mine be destroyed. That's," her voice cracked, "that's everything." Alara pulled her into a fierce hug. Mira stiffened. She wasn't used to being touched with affection, but then she melted into it, letting herself feel the impossible reality of having a sister, of having family, of belonging somewhere for the first time in her entire life. "We're going to figure this out together," Alara whispered. "The politics, the titles, all of it. But right now, I just want to know you. I want to hear about your life, your training, what you love, what you fear, what makes you laugh. I want to know my sister." "I want that too," Mira admitted. "But Alara, I'm not grave like you. I'm not used to standing in the light. I've survived by being invisible." "Then I'll teach you to be visible, and you'll teach me to be real. Deal?" Mira pulled back, searched Alara's face, this mirror image that was somehow both stranger and the most familiar thing in the world. "Deal." They returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, two sisters facing a kingdom that had tried to separate them. The night was far from over. There would be questions, investigations, political maneuvering. The court would test them, trying to drive wedges between them. The king and queen would have to navigate the scandal. The entire succession would need to be re-examined. But for now, Mira stood beside her sister, her twin, her blood, her mirror, and felt something she'd never felt before. Not just acceptance, not just recognition, but home. The ballroom fell silent again as they entered. The king was speaking with advisors. The queen was crying quietly into a handkerchief, and the assembled nobility watched with calculating eyes, already trying to determine how to profit from this upheaval. Ilara led Mira to the center of the floor. Then she turned to face the court and said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast room, "I know many of you are shocked, confused, perhaps even angry at the revelation of my sister's existence, but I want to make something absolutely clear." She lifted Mira's hand, displayed the matched birthmarks to the entire assembly. "This is not a scandal to be managed. This is not a political inconvenience to be buried. This is justice delayed for 18 years finally being acknowledged. And anyone who treats Princess Mira as anything less than my equal will answer to me personally." A young lord near the front, Duke Ashford's son, known for his casual cruelty, laughed nervously. "Your Highness, surely you can't expect us to simply accept." "I expect you to do your duty," Ilara cut him off, "which is to respect the crown's decree. My father has acknowledged Mira as princess. Therefore, she is princess. Your feelings about her heritage are irrelevant. But the succession will be determined by the king and his advisors, as is proper, not by gossip and prejudice." Ilara's voice was ice. "Next question." No one spoke. The young lord subsided, red-faced, and slowly, like a wave rolling across the ballroom, the nobility began to bow. First the ones closest to the king, then spreading outward, until every single person was offering obeisance to the two princesses standing hand in hand in the center of the floor. It was a performance, Mira knew that. Half of them were seething behind their gracious smiles. But it was also power, the power of official recognition, of royal decree, of a princess willing to defend her sister with everything she had. "Dance with me," Ilara said suddenly. "I want our first act as acknowledged sisters to be joy, not politics." "I don't know how to dance," Mira protested. "I was never taught." "Then I'll teach you, right here, right now, in front of everyone. Just follow my lead." The orchestra, reading the room's mood perfectly, struck up a waltz, and Alara swept Mira into the steps, guiding her through the movements with patience and grace. Mira stumbled at first, hyper-aware of all the eyes watching, but Alara just laughed, caught her when she faltered, and gradually Mira found the rhythm. They danced in silence for several measures. Then Alara leaned close and whispered, "I've dreamed of you my entire life. Did you dream of me too?" "Yes," Mira admitted. "A woman with golden hair and violet eyes, holding me, loving me. I thought she was my mother, but she was you, wasn't she? My twin, calling to me across the distance." "Blood calls to blood," Alara said again. "Even when the world tries to silence it, even when power and fear and prejudice build walls between us, it calls anyway. And truth cannot hide forever," Mira finished. They smiled at each other, two halves of a whole, finally reunited, and continued dancing as the court watched and whispered and began, reluctantly, to accept the impossible truth. The night wore on. More dances, more whispered conversations, more political calculations happening in shadowed corners. Mira met lords and ladies who hours ago had been mocking her, now offering stiff congratulations and transparent attempts to curry favor. She met the king's advisors, who looked at her like a problem to be solved. She met the royal physicians, who examined her birthmark with professional interest and confirmed what everyone now knew. She and Alara were identical twins. Dr. Vern appeared at one point, his eyes bright with tears. "Your Highness," he said formally, bowing to Mira, "I am honored to have trained you." "You're still training me," Mira said. "I'm still your apprentice. Titles don't change that." "Actually, they do." "You can't serve as a physician's apprentice when you're a princess. It's not appropriate." He looked heartbroken. "Then change what's appropriate," Alara interjected. "My sister is brilliant at healing. The kingdom needs that brilliance. So we'll create a new position, royal physician, answerable only to the crown. She can continue her training while also using her position to reform how medicine is practiced throughout Astoria." Dr. Vern stared. That's revolutionary." "Good," Alara said. "It's time for a few revolutions." As the ball finally began to wind down, nobility departing with shocked expressions and frantic plans to write letters to allies, the queen approached Mira. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than she'd seemed on the throne. "May I speak with you?" she asked, privately. They walked to a small antechamber off the main ballroom. The queen closed the door, then simply stood there, staring at Mira like she was afraid she'd disappear. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said finally. "What I did, what I allowed to be done, is unforgivable. But I need you to know, I did love you. Even as they took you away, even as I told myself it was necessary for the kingdom, I loved you. And I've spent 18 years wondering if you were alive, if you were safe, if you blamed me for abandoning you." Mira wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold on to the rage that had sustained her through all those years of being invisible. But looking at the queen's face, a face that was her face, aged and worn by regret, she felt something in her chest soften. "I was loved," she said quietly. "The woman who raised me, Grandmother Kessa, she loved me fiercely. She taught me to heal, to think, to survive in a world that didn't want me. She gave me the tools I needed to become someone worthy. So no, I didn't grow up in a palace, but I didn't grow up without love. That's good. That's so good." The queen was crying again. "I'd like to know about her. About Kessa. About the woman who did what I couldn't, who protected you, raised you, loved you openly." "I'd like that too," Mira said, and found that she meant it. The queen reached out hesitantly, and this time Mira didn't flinch away from the touch. They stood together in the small antechamber, mother and daughter, separated by 18 years of lies and reunited by one sister's courage, and began the slow, painful work of rebuilding what had been broken. When Mira finally made it back to her tiny apprentice quarters near dawn, she found Alara already there, curled up in the single chair with a book of medical texts in her lap. "How did you get in here?" Mira asked. "I'm a princess. I can go wherever I want," Alara grinned. "Also, I bribed your neighbor with a very expensive necklace. That's abuse of power." "Probably. Are you going to report me?" Mira laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "No, I'm going to make tea and figure out where you're sleeping, because that chair is not comfortable. We'll share your bed, like we probably did in the womb." "That's weird." "Everything about this situation is weird. We might as well embrace it." They did. Two sisters who'd been separated since birth, lying side by side in the dark, whispering stories of their different lives. Alara told Mira about the suffocating pressure of being the perfect princess, of never being allowed to make mistakes or show weakness. Mira told Alara about the casual cruelty of being different, of learning to make herself small to avoid being hurt. And slowly, in the quiet hours before dawn, they began to weave together a new understanding, not just of each other, but of who they could become together, two halves of a whole finally complete. "Mira," Alara said sleepily as the first light began to filter through the window. "I'm glad they failed. I'm glad whatever they tried to do to you didn't work." "Because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Mira's throat tightened. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, too." "Then we'll be the best thing that ever happened to this kingdom. Together." "Together," Mira agreed. And as they drifted toward sleep, hands clasped between them, two sisters who'd been denied each other for 18 years finally felt what they'd been missing all along: each other. The weeks that followed were chaos. Official investigations confirmed what everyone already knew. Mira and Alara were identical twins, separated at birth by a conspiracy of fearful physicians and prejudiced advisors. The scandal rocked the kingdom. 3 royal physicians fled into exile rather than face questioning. The king's chief advisor resigned in disgrace. But through it all, Alara stood firm. She insisted on joint appearances, joint titles, joint responsibilities. She refused to participate in any state function unless Mira was invited as an equal. And slowly, grudgingly, the court adapted. It helped that Mira was brilliant. Within a month, she'd reorganized the Royal Medical Corps, implementing new sanitation protocols that cut infection rates by half. She'd also begun treating common citizens in the palace courtyard every morning, a visible reminder that royalty should serve the people, not just rule them. The common folk loved her. The nobility remained divided. But with Alara's fierce protection and the king's official backing, Mira's position became unassailable. 6 months after that fateful ball, the king made a formal announcement. The succession would be shared. When he died, Astoria would have 2 queens, joint rulers, neither superior to the other. It was unprecedented. It was radical. It was exactly what the kingdom needed. "Are you ready for this?" Alara asked as they prepared to receive the news publicly. "No," Mira admitted. "Are you?" "Not even slightly. But I have you, so I'm not afraid." They walked onto the palace balcony hand in hand. Princess Alara in cloth of gold, Princess Mira in deep crimson silk, both wearing matching crowns that the royal jeweler had crafted as symbols of their joint inheritance. The crowd below roared, not with mockery this time, but with genuine acclaim. Because over the past months, they'd watched 2 sisters transform each other. Alara becoming more real, more engaged with the kingdom's actual problems. Mira becoming more visible, more confident in claiming space she'd always been denied. "Long live the princesses!" someone shouted. The cry was taken up, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Long live Ilara! Long live Mira! Long live the twin crowns!" Mira looked at her sister, her mirror, her twin, her other half, and saw her own joy reflected back. "We did it," Ilara whispered. "We're doing it," Mira corrected. "This is just the beginning." "Then let's begin, together." "Always together," Mira agreed. And they stood on that balcony, two sisters who'd been separated by fear and prejudice and reunited by courage and love, and looked out at a kingdom they would transform. Not by being perfect, not by following the old rules, but by being exactly who they were, different, complementary, and infinitely stronger together than apart. Blood had called to blood. Truth had refused to hide. And two girls who'd been judged, dismissed, and separated had become the most powerful force in the kingdom. Not despite their differences, but because of them. Years later, when historians wrote about the reign of the twin queens, they would struggle to explain how two people could rule as one, how they made decisions, resolved conflicts, navigated the complex politics of a kingdom that had never seen shared power before. But those who knew them understood. It wasn't complicated. It was simple. They'd been born together, separated by cruelty, reunited by courage. And having found each other again, they refused to ever be divided. So they ruled as they lived, side by side, hand in hand, two halves of a whole. And the kingdom they built reflected that unity. A place where difference was celebrated, not feared. Where skin color didn't determine value. Where truth mattered more than comfortable lies. Where anyone at all, could be seen, heard, valued, loved. All because one princess had been brave enough to call a stranger sister before the entire court. And that stranger had been brave enough to answer, yes. Mira laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "No, I'm going to make tea and figure out where you're sleeping, because that chair is not comfortable. We'll share your bed, like we probably did in the womb." That's weird. Everything about this situation is weird. We might as well embrace it. They did share the bed. Two sisters who'd been separated since birth, lying side by side in the dark, whispering stories of their different lives. Ilara told Mira about the suffocating pressure of being the perfect princess, of never being allowed to make mistakes or show weakness. Mira told Ilara about the casual cruelty of being different, of learning to make herself small to avoid being hurt. And slowly, in the quiet hours before dawn, they began to weave together a new understanding, not just of each other, but of who they could become together. Two halves of a whole, finally complete. "Mira," Ilara said sleepily as the first light began to filter through the window. "I'm glad they failed. I'm glad whatever they tried to do to erase you didn't work, because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Mira's throat tightened. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, too. Then we'll be the best thing that ever happened to this kingdom." "Together," Mira agreed. And as they drifted towards sleep, hands clasped between them, two sisters who'd been denied each other for 18 years finally felt what they'd been missing all along: each other. The weeks that followed were chaos. Official investigations confirmed what everyone already knew. Mira and Ilara were identical twins, separated at birth by a conspiracy of fearful physicians and prejudiced advisors. The scandal rocked the kingdom. 3 royal physicians fled into exile rather than face questioning. The king's chief advisor resigned in disgrace. But through it all, Ilara stood firm. She insisted on joint appearances, joint titles, joint responsibilities. She refused to participate in any state function unless Mira was invited as an equal. And slowly, grudgingly, the court adapted. It helped that Mira was brilliant. Within a month, she'd reorganized the Royal Medical Corps, implementing new sanitation protocols that cut infection rates by half. She'd also begun treating common citizens in the palace courtyard every morning, a visible reminder that royalty should serve the people, not just rule them. The common folk loved her. The nobility remained divided. But with Ilara's fierce protection and the king's official backing, Mira's position became unassailable. 6 months after that fateful ball, the king made a formal announcement. The succession would be shared. When he died, Astoria would have 2 queens, joint rulers, neither superior to the other. It was unprecedented. It was radical. It was exactly what the kingdom needed. "Are you ready for this?" Ilara asked as they prepared to receive the news publicly. "No," Mira admitted. "Are you?" "Not even slightly. But I have you, so I'm not afraid." They walked onto the palace balcony hand in hand, Princess Ilara in cloth of gold, Princess Mira in deep crimson silk, both wearing matching crowns that the royal jeweler had crafted as symbols of their joint inheritance. The crowd below roared. Not with mockery this time, because over the past months they'd watched 2 sisters transform each other, Ilara becoming more real, more engaged with the kingdom's actual problems, Mira becoming more visible, more confident in claiming space she'd always been denied. "Long live the princesses!" someone shouted. The cry was taken up, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Long live Ilara! Long live Mira! Long live the twin crowns!" Mira looked at her sister, her mirror, her twin, her other half, and saw her own joy reflected back. "We did it," Ilara whispered. "We're doing it," Mira corrected. "This is just the beginning." "Then, let's begin." "Together. Always together," Mira agreed. And they stood on that balcony, 2 sisters who'd been separated by fear and prejudice and reunited by courage and love, and looked out at a kingdom they would transform. Not by being perfect, not by following the old rules, but by being exactly who they were, different, complementary, and infinitely stronger together than apart. Blood had called to blood. Truth had refused to hide. And 2 girls who'd been judged, dismissed, and separated had become the most powerful force in the kingdom. Not despite their differences, but because of them. Years later, when historians wrote about the reign of the twin queens, they would struggle to explain how 2 people could rule as one, how they made decisions, resolved conflicts, navigated the complex politics of a kingdom that had never seen shared power before. But those who knew them understood. It wasn't complicated. It was simple. They'd been born together, separated by cruelty, reunited by courage, and having found each other again, they refused to ever be divided. So they ruled as they lived, side by side, hand in hand, 2 halves of a whole. And the kingdom they built reflected that unity, a place where difference was celebrated, not feared. Where skin color didn't determine value. Where truth mattered more than comfortable lies. Where anyone at all could be seen, heard, valued, loved. All because one princess had been brave enough to call a stranger sister before the entire court. And that stranger had been brave enough to answer, "Yes."